Why did the room feel suddenly colder, even though the afternoon sun still poured through the hotel window? Sarah Martinez's fingers tightened around the silk of her maid of honor dress, the burgundy fabric smooth against her calloused hands. Hands far more used to the grit of rifle grips and the bite of climbing rope than something meant for celebration. She'd been home for exactly 48 hours, the longest leave she'd had in 2 years. Every minute had been devoted to Emma's wedding. Flower arrangements, seating charts, little details that normal sisters argued over. But the phones. Vibration. Harsh, sharp, almost angry. Cut through the stillness like a warning shot. One glance at the screen, and the rest of the world seemed to vanish. Encrypted orders, emergency deployment. A terrorist attack had reduced a children's hospital in Eastern Europe to a skeletal ruin of dust and steel. Hundreds were buried air. Pockets closing in by the hour. The message was mercilessly clinical. Specialized extraction required. Your unit is the only team qualified. Launch in 18 hours. Report immediately. Her own reflection in the mirror seemed to mock her. A woman split cleanly in two. The dress was family, promise, and normalcy. The phone was duty, honor, and a call that could not wait. Tomorrow was the wedding. Emma's wedding. Bidet Sarah had sworn she wouldn't miss. She pressed the phone to her ear, listening to her sister's excited voice from the bridal salon. "Please tell me you're at the airport already." Emma laughed. "Mom's losing her mind about the seating arrangements." Sarah's throat tightened. Her silence stretched too long. She could hear Emma's joy faltering, confusion creeping. I can't come." The words fell like stones into still water, their ripples destined to touch everything. A sharp inhale on the other end. The rustle of satin, then, "What do you mean?" Small, fragile, the voice of someone bracing for a blow. Sarah tried to explain. The mission, the children, the urgency, but Emma's voice cracked into a whiplash scream. "You promised, you swore nothing would keep you away. You said this was different." The memory burned. That night months ago. Looking into her sister's eyes and believing she could keep that vow. Believing it enough to say it out loud. "I know what I said, but people are always dying somewhere, Sarah. I'm your sister. Doesn't that mean anything anymore?" Her mother's voice came on next, colder than any winter Sarah had endured in uniform. "Don't bother calling back. You've made your choice again." When the line went dead, Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, still in the burgundy dress, staring at the mission brief flashing on her laptop. She imagined Emma holding her bouquet tomorrow, the empty chair beside her. But she also saw the rubble, the terrified children, the parents clawing through concrete with their bare hands. It had always been this way. Duty on one side, family on the other, and tonight. She would pack her gear knowing that no matter how many lives she saved, she would lose something she could never get back. How do you focus on packing gear when your mind keeps replaying a voice cracking through tears? Sarah's hands moved automatically. Helmet, gloves, climbing harness, rescue saw, each piece sliding into the duffel in precise, practiced order. But her thoughts weren't in the hotel room. They were at the bridal salon, in the echo of Emma's hurt. In her mother's final icy dismissal, the burgundy dress lay folded across the bed like some relic from another life, the soft sheen of silk jarring against the matte black of her tactical vest. She paused, staring at the two worlds laid out side by side. Her stomach churned. In another 24 hours, she would be halfway across the world, sweating under floodlights in the dust of a ruined hospital, while her sister's voice said I'd do without her there to hear it. She shut the duffel hard, the zippers rasp loud in the silence, and headed for the transport hub. By the time she reached the base, the air smelled faintly of jet fuel and cold metal. Her unit was already gathering near the hangar, their conversations clipped, efficient. There were no jokes tonight, no easy banter. They'd all read the mission brief. They knew the stakes. Colonel Hayes was waiting by the boarding ramp, his expression unreadable under the floodlight glare. You ready for this, Martinez? Sarah nodded, though readiness felt like a lie. Yes, sir. You're gonna be point for the east side. Building's unstable. You know what that means. Fast in, fast out. And? Don't get dead. A faint ghost of a smile tugged at Hayes' mouth. That's the one. The C-17's engines roared to life, swallowing their words. Sarah settled into a webbed seat, helmet balanced on her knees. The vibrations traveled up through the floor into her bones, and with each shudder, the wedding felt further away. She tried not to think about the fact that when the sun rose on her sister's big day, she would be staring into the wreckage of lives torn apart. Somewhere over the Atlantic, she closed her eyes and drifted into a restless half-sleep. She dreamt of a white dress and a pile of rubble, the two images bleeding into each other until she couldn't tell which was which. By the time they landed at the forward operating base, dawn was breaking, a cold, gray light that made the shattered cityscape beyond the fence look like something from a forgotten war. Smoke still curled from distant rooftops. The faint sound of sirens rose and fell on the wind. They loaded into armored transports and moved toward the disaster zone. As they neared the hospital, Sarah caught sight of the collapsed building. The sight hit her like a physical blow. Half the structure was gone, the remaining walls leaning at sickening angles. Twisted steel jutted like broken ribs, and dust clung to every surface, muting the world into shades of gray. Children's drawings still fluttered on one surviving wall, bright scraps of paper against the ruin, stick figure families, sons with smiling faces, things that had survived. The blast, only to be pinned there as cruel reminders. Sarah and her team suited up. The weight of the gear was familiar, grounding, harnesses, helmets, respirators, comms checks in the periphery of her mind. She imagined Emma's veil being adjusted in front of a mirror somewhere across the world. Two ceremonies beginning at the same time. One for love, one for survival. Martinez, East Side entry is open. Hayes' voice crackled in her headset. We've got survivors under the pediatric ward. Local first responders can't reach them without risking collapse. On it. The first 30 minutes were all instinct and muscle memory, navigating the maze of debris, testing every step, listening for faint sounds beneath the creaks and groans of shifting concrete. They pulled two adults from a shallow void, then a boy no older than 7, who clung to Sarah like she was the last solid thing in the world. Hey, buddy, she whispered in broken Romanian, her voice gentle despite the roar of generators and saws around them. We're getting you out of here, okay? His eyes were wide, terrified, and for a second, she saw Emma at that age. Small, scared of thunderstorms, hiding under Sarah's bed. They kept moving. Every rescue brought relief and another spike of adrenaline. But time was a predator at their heels. Each passing minute meant less oxygen for those still trapped. By mid-morning, they'd pulled 17 survivors. Sweat trickled down Sarah's back beneath the Kevlar. Her gloves were caked in dust, her throat raw from shouting over the chaos. She was mid-rescue on a 6-year-old boy pinned under a beam when Hayes' voice broke in again. Martinez, East Side, pediatric ward. We've got a family of 4 alive. She freed the boy, handed him off to medics, and headed for the coordinates. The family was conscious, but shaken. 2 parents, 2 daughters. Their eyes darting wildly as Sarah crawled toward them. The mother kept pointing toward a section of collapsed ceiling. Her words rapid, desperate. Sarah caught only fragments in translation. Another child. Her stomach dropped. Sir, we've got a missing girl, maybe 4 years old, deeper in the debris. Negative, Martinez. Hayes' reply came back tense. That area's unstable. Get your team out. Sarah's gaze met the mother's, eyes red, lips trembling, fingers clawing at the rubble in frantic refusal. Sarah could hear it now. Faint, but unmistakable, a child's cry. Sir, I can reach her. Give me 10 minutes. Martinez, but she was already moving. The tunnel was barely wide enough to crawl through. Shards of rebar scraped her shoulders, dust choking her lungs. The sound of her own breathing filled her ears. Fast, uneven, broken only by the small, frightened sobs ahead. Halfway in, her phone buzzed against her chest plate. She almost ignored it, but habit made her glance. Jake, a video, against. Protocol. She hit play. Emma, sitting alone at the head table, champagne untouched, her eyes glistening. Guests danced in the background, their laughter distant and disconnected from the tight, small world Emma seemed trapped in. Her gaze kept flicking toward the empty chair beside her. Sarah froze. The weight of two loves pressed on her. The sister she was losing in that moment, and the child she hadn't yet reached. For a beat, she couldn't breathe. Then a small hand reached through the rubble ahead, fingers trembling. "I'm coming." "Sweetheart," she said, pushing forward into the darkness. Her voice was steady now. Even if her heart wasn't, she reached the girl, coaxed her into her arms, and began the long, slow crawl back to daylight. When they emerged, medics whisked the child away. Hayes was watching from a few feet off, his jaw tight, not with anger, something else. A calculation forming behind his eyes. The mission wrapped hours later. 23 lives saved. The kind of number that looked good in a report. But when Sarah finally sat on an overturned crate behind a supply truck, her hands shaking around her phone, the videos Jake had sent didn't feel like victories. They felt like reminders of what she'd lost in exchange. Hayes came and sat beside her. "Hell of a job today, Martinez. That little girl's going to make it." Sarah nodded, eyes still locked on the glowing screen. Another video played, Emma cutting her cake, smiling for the camera, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "My sister will never forgive me," Sarah murmured, voice hoarse. This was supposed to be different. Hayes studied her for a long moment, then asked, "What time's it back?" "Home? About 9 p.m. Reception's ending soon." He nodded once, decisively. "Pack your dress uniform, Martinez. We're taking a detour." Was he serious? For a moment, Sarah just stared at Colonel Hayes, half expecting him to smirk and admit it was a bad joke. But Hayes wasn't joking. His weathered face was set in that calm, unshakable way that told her he'd already made up his mind. "Our transport route passes right through your hometown," he said simply, as if it were nothing. Funny how military logistics work sometimes. Her heart kicked hard against her ribs. "Sir, protocol says we maintain morale." Hayes cut in, "And right now, my best urban rescue specialist is running at about 60% because her head's not where it should be. That's a tactical problem." The impossibility of it all swirled in her mind. An entire convoy, military vehicles fresh from a rescue op, rolling into a small-town wedding reception. The paperwork alone would take, already filed. Hayes said, waving his satellite phone. "Amazing how fast red tape moves when you know the right people." 30 minutes later, she was standing beside the elite Humvee in a fresh dress uniform. The metal ribbons gleamed under the cold halogen lights. Bronze Star, Purple Heart Combat Action Badge, each one a story, a scar, and tonight, they'd march her into a completely different kind of battlefield. When the engines roared to life, she sat in the passenger seat, her garment bag draped carefully across her lap. Through the bulletproof glass, familiar landmarks began to appear. The faded sign for Millbrook, the water tower she and Emma used to climb in secret, the diner where they'd once split a strawberry milkshake after school. "You nervous, Captain?" Sergeant Rodriguez asked from behind the wheel. "Terrified," she admitted. Corporal Williams' voice floated from the back seat. "If she's mad, she's mad. But at least you showed up. That's got to count for something." She pulled out her phone and dialed Jake. "Where are you?" He whispered the moment he answered. "Outside town. Listen, whatever you do, keep Emma away from the parking lot for the next 10 minutes. Don't tell her I called. Jake's tone shifted to disbelief, then pure adrenaline. Are you serious right now? Wait, is that engine noise? Oh my God, Sarah. The convoy rolled into the lot of Riverside Manor, tires crunching on gravel, headlights cutting through the dark. Through the glass front doors, she could see the warm amber glow of the reception hall, shadows of people. Swaying to music, the muffled thump of bass drifted through the night air. Her unit began dismounting, straightening into formation without being asked. Even after 18 hours of crawling through concrete dust, they stood sharp, uniforms immaculate, soldiers who understood sacrifice, who knew the ache of missing. Birthdays, funerals, graduations, and who weren't about to let their captain walk in alone. Carl Hayes stepped to her side. You ready for this, Martinez? Sarah took a breath that felt like it reached all the way to her boots. She thought of the videos Jake had sent. Emma's forced smile, the empty chair, the promises she had broken. I've never been more ready, sir. Inside, the reception was shifting into that late-night rhythm. Older guests lingering over coffee, younger ones laughing loudly on the dance floor. Emma sat at the head table, wedding dress spilling around her like ivory silk clouds, her smile mechanical. As David spoke with an elderly relative, her eyes kept wandering, searching for something she didn't expect to find. Jake made his move, slipping toward the DJ booth. His hands trembled slightly as he grabbed the microphone. Excuse me, everyone, he said, voice carrying over the music. I'd like to make a special toast to the bride and groom. Emma looked up, confused. Jake, you already... Trust me, you're gonna want to hear this one. Come. To the dance floor, David rose, taking her hand, leading her toward the center. Guests circled around them with champagne flutes, curious smiles on their faces. Emma's mother dabbed at her eyes. Still raw from the emotional day, outside, the rumble of diesel engines swelled like a gathering storm. Guests near the windows turned, murmuring. Some pressed closer to the glass, their expressions shifting from confusion to surprise. What? In the world? Someone whispered. Emma's brow furrowed. Is that? Jake's grin was wide enough to hurt. Turn around. The massive oak doors swung open. Not rushed, not timid, but with the steady authority of someone who had faced worse than awkward family reunions. Sarah stepped through, her dress uniform catching the light. Her posture razor straight. Behind her, 23 soldiers marched in perfect formation. No combat gear now. Just the crisp formality of dress blues, every crease sharp, every chin high. Gasps rippled through the room. Applause erupted in pockets, but Sarah only saw Emma. She stood frozen, bouquet dangling loosely in her hands, eyes wide as if she couldn't trust what she was seeing. Sorry I'm late, little sister, Sarah said, voice carrying clear across the sudden hush. Had to save some lives first, but I couldn't miss our dance. The bouquet hit the floor. For a long, breathless moment, no one moved. It was as if the air itself had thickened, holding the sisters apart across the expanse of polished wood and candle-lit tables. Emma's hands flew to her mouth. Tears gathered instantly, blurring the image before her until all she could see was the outline of a figure she had known her whole life. The way Sarah's shoulders squared when she was holding herself together, the way her chin lifted like she was ready to face whatever came. Next, Sarah. It came out like a prayer, barely audible. The one and only, Sarah answered, taking a slow step forward. Her voice was steady, but her throat burned. I believe I owe you a maid of honor speech. Something in Emma broke then. The dam. Holding back months of worry, weeks of disappointment, hours of trying to act like her absence didn't matter. She moved, not walked, ran. The heavy folds of her wedding dress billowed around her as she crossed the dance floor. Guests stepping aside in stunned silence when she collided with Sarah's chest. It was all heat and shaking limbs and the sound of someone trying to cry and breathe at the same time. Sarah's arms closed around her automatically, bracing for impact, holding on as if letting go might shatter them both. "You came," Emma gasped against her shoulder. Her voice was muffled by the crisp wool of the uniform. I thought you chose them over me." "I chose both," Sarah whispered back, her own voice cracking. "We saved 23 people today, but none of it would have meant anything if I couldn't be here for you." The words settled between them, quiet but solid, and Emma's grip only tightened. Around them, the guests began to clap, the sound swelling until it filled the hall like applause after a long-awaited curtain call. Their father stood near the back, his hands trembling as he lowered his glass. For the first time in years, Sarah saw tears in his eyes. Beside him, their mother pressed both hands over her heart, her lips moving soundlessly, a whispered thank you no one else could hear. David stood just beyond them, smiling like he understood now, really understood, why this day had felt incomplete without Sarah. He stepped forward, resting a hand on Emma's back, but didn't say a word. Some moments didn't need them. The DJ, sensing what everyone else felt, didn't bother asking. He just queued up the song, the one Sarah and Emma had danced to since childhood, their private tradition at every family gathering. A few soft guitar notes drifted through the speakers, wrapping the room in the kind of nostalgia that makes your chest ache. Emma pulled back just far enough to look into her sister's face. "How?" she asked, eyes still shining. "I thought your mission. My commanding officer decided sometimes the most important mission is showing up for family," Sarah said, tilting her head toward Hayes, who stood at the edge of the room watching. With a faint smile, Emma's gaze followed hers and lit with recognition. She mouthed a thank you to him, and Hayes responded with a small salute. They began to sway to the music. No fancy steps, no choreography, just two sisters holding on, moving slow, the world shrinking down to the circle of their arms. The uniform brushed against satin, metals catching the light with every turn. Around them, the soldiers who'd marched in now formed a quiet perimeter, not as guards, but as witnesses. "Turns out our route home went straight through Millbrook," Sarah murmured with a small, guilty smile. Emma laughed through her tears. "That's the biggest load of military BS I've ever heard." "Probably," Sarah admitted, "but it got me here." As the chorus swelled, Sarah felt the tension begin to ease from Emma's frame. The weight she'd been carrying since the phone call seemed to melt, replaced with something lighter. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the start of it. By the second verse, other couples joined them. David stepped in to take Emma's hand, spinning her gently as Sarah backed away, letting the space fill with joy. Again, she didn't leave the floor, though. Relatives hugged her as they passed. Friends she barely remembered clasped her hands. Veterans in attendance clasped her shoulder with a quiet respect that didn't need words. Across the room, Colonel Hayes found himself surrounded by Emma's parents. Her mother's eyes were red but shining, her father speaking to him with a rare sincerity. Hayes took it all in with a nod, never one to claim credit but not dismissing it either. As the song ended, David kissed his new wife's forehead, and Emma glanced around until she found her sister again. With a small gesture, she beckoned Sarah back over. The conversation between them now was quieter, meant only for the space they stood in. "You missed my speech," Emma said softly. "Then, I'll give it now," Sarah replied. She didn't raise her voice, but the way she spoke, the way the crowd naturally leaned in, made it carry. "You once told me you didn't understand how I could choose a life that kept me away from the people I love. And for a long time, I didn't have a good answer. Tonight I do, because duty and family aren't supposed to compete. They're supposed to stand side by side. I've learned that you can fight for strangers, but if you lose the ones who matter most, you've already lost the battle." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was the kind that comes when everyone in the room feels the truth in what was said. Emma's eyes filled again, but this Time her tears came with a smile. Someone in the back started the applause. It grew, filling the room again, rising until it felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Sarah had been in firefights, rescue zones, and disasters where adrenaline ruled every heartbeat. But this quiet, unarmored moment in the middle of a wedding reception might have been the most dangerous and the most necessary of all. The music softened into something slower, the kind of song that plays when the night is beginning to close, but no one wants to admit it yet. Guests were drifting toward the coat racks, gathering handbags, stealing one last drink before the drive home. Sarah stood near the edge of the dance floor, watching her sister laugh with David and their parents. The laughter wasn't forced anymore. It came easily now, with that same familiar tilt of the head Emma had when she was truly happy. It had been years since Sarah had seen it in person. She felt a presence beside her before she heard the voice. Was it worth it? Colonel Hayes didn't look at her, just sip from a cup of coffee he'd somehow acquired. Yes, Sarah said immediately, no hesitation. Worth every mile. Every form you'll have to fill out. He huffed something between a laugh and a sigh. That paperwork's going to haunt me for weeks. Sarah glanced at him. Then why do it? Hayes finally looked her way, his eyes catching the dim light. Because I've led enough missions to know the ones that matter aren't always in the field. Across the room, Emma was weaving through the thinning crowd, a determined look. In her eye, David followed at a respectful distance, letting her go. She reached Sarah and didn't say a word at first, just slipped her arms around her again, holding on like she still didn't quite believe she was real. You're not leaving tonight, are you? Emma asked into her shoulder. Sarah started to answer, but Emma pulled back, searching her face for the truth. I mean it, Sarah. Our honeymoon doesn't start until next week. We've got 5 whole days, you and me. No uniforms, no missions. Just sisters. We could even do some of the stupid stuff we never got to when you were deployed. The offer hit harder than Sarah expected. She could feel the quiet weight of her unit behind her, the schedule ticking in the back of her mind, the logistics that said she should be on the road in a few hours. But this was the thing she'd been missing without even realizing how badly. She looked past Emma to where Hayes stood, leaning casually against the wall. Already pulling out his phone, he caught her glance and smirked. Emergency leave, he said simply. Family emergencies require immediate attention. And this qualifies, Emma laughed. A light sound that cut straight through the heaviness of the last 24 hours. You'd really stay? Sarah nodded. If you'll have me? Emma rolled her eyes, swatting at her arm. Don't be ridiculous. I'll have you forever. The DJ announced the final song of the night. Something upbeat enough to pull everyone back onto the floor. Even some of the soldiers joined in, stiff at first, but loosening as the music carried them. Rodriguez twirled one of Emma's bridesmaids to the cheers of a small circle of guests. Williams somehow ended up in a laughing dance battle with a group of teenagers. For the first time in months, Sarah wasn't thinking about her next deployment or the last mission she'd been on. She wasn't calculating escape routes or scanning for threats. She was there, fully, unshakably present. When the last notes faded, the applause was warm, lingering. Guests began filing toward the doors, embracing each other in long goodbyes. The reception hall emptied slowly, until only a few people remained. Emma appeared again, still glowing, though now her hair had loosened from its pins, and her dress trailed a little more dust from the floor. She handed Sarah a steaming paper cup. Coffee for the road? Emma said. Sarah raised an eyebrow. I thought I wasn't going anywhere. You're not, Emma confirmed, linking her arm through her sister's. But this isn't for travel. It's for the kind of late-night talks we used to have in the kitchen. The ones where Mom would yell at us to go to bed, and we just keep talking until the sun came up. They stepped outside into the cool night. The parking lot was almost empty now, save for the convoy parked quietly at the far end. Most of The soldiers were clustered together, swapping quiet jokes. The adrenaline finally wearing off, Sarah turned to look at her unit. "Thank you," she said simply. "For doing this, for being here," Rodriguez grinned. "Ma'am, you've dragged us through collapsed buildings and into firefights. A wedding reception's a walk in the park." One by one, they filed into their vehicles. Hayes was the last. To approach, he extended his hand, but when Sarah took it, he pulled her into a quick, firm hug instead. "Enjoy your leave, Captain," he said. "And for what it's worth, you earned this one." As the convoy rolled out, the deep hum of the engines fading into the distance, Sarah stood beside Emma under the glow of the lot's single street lamp. The night felt different now, lighter. Like a weight had shifted off her shoulders and found somewhere else to rest. Emma took a sip of her coffee, then looked sideways at Sarah. "So, you gonna tell me everything about the mission?" Sarah shook her head. "Not tonight. Tomorrow." "Then, maybe," Sarah said with a faint smile. "But tonight, I just want to be your sister." And for the first time in years, that felt like the only duty that mattered. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and leftover wedding cake. It was just past 1 in the morning, and the house was finally silent. The bustle of the reception, the thrum of music, the swell of applause, all of it had been replaced by the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of old wood under their feet. Emma sat cross-legged at the kitchen table, still in her wedding dress, the fabric pooling around her like snowdrifts. Her hair had come loose, a few stray curls sticking to her damp cheeks where tears, happy and otherwise, had dried. In front of her sat 2 mismatched mugs. Sarah leaned against the counter for a moment before joining her. She wasn't sure why she hesitated. Maybe because this was the moment where the noise had finally died down, where there was no mission to rush toward, no crowd to distract them. Just 2 sisters and the questions that had been building for years. Emma slid one of the mugs toward her. "Black." "Same as always." Sarah smiled faintly. "You remember." "I remember everything," Emma said. And there was no malice in it, just truth. For a while, they drank in silence, outside. The wind moved through the trees in soft shivers. Somewhere in the distance, a car door slammed and an engine started, fading quickly down the road. It was Emma who broke the stillness. "Do you ever wish you'd picked something else? Another job? Another life?" Sarah took her time answering, tracing the rim of her mug with one finger. "Sometimes. Not because I don't believe in what I do, but because it costs so much, and you don't always know the price until you've already paid it." Emma's gaze dropped to the table. "I know you've missed things before. Birthdays, Christmas, but I don't know. I thought this time was different, that maybe I mattered more than the mission." "You do," Sarah said immediately, leaning forward. "But it's not that simple." If I'd said no, if I'd stayed, I would have been here with you, but I would have known. Somewhere out there, kids were dying in the dark because I wasn't there to help." Emma's fingers tightened around her mug. "And if I'm honest, that's what scares me. That you'll always have to go. That I'll always have to wonder if you'll show up." Sarah swallowed hard. She wanted to tell her it wasn't like that. That she could change it, make it better. But lies were heavier than truths. And she'd carried enough weight lately. "I can't promise I'll always be here, but I can promise I'll fight like hell to be." The quiet stretched again, but it didn't feel as brittle now. Emma reached for the box of cake slices she'd sent home with the 2 of them, pulling out a fork. She passed it to Sarah without looking up. "Then start with this, because I saved you the last piece of the lemon layer. And if you let me eat it alone, I will hold it against you for life." Sarah laughed, a short, unguarded sound that felt strange in her own throat after the day she'd had. "Deal." She took a bite, the sweetness almost jarring after hours of grit and dust. For the first time all night, she let herself lean back in her chair, letting the fatigue settle in without fighting it. They talked until the coffee went cold. not about the mission, not in detail. Instead, they drifted through stories from childhood, summers at the lake, sneaking out past curfew, the time Sarah had chased away the neighbor's dog when it cornered Emma by the fence. They remembered things differently in places, but neither cared about the details. Somewhere around 3, Emma stood and stretched, wincing at the weight of her dress. I should probably change before I destroy this thing. She disappeared down the hall, her footsteps fading. Sarah stayed at the table, staring into the dark beyond the window. She thought about the faces of the 23 people they'd pulled from the rubble. She thought about the ones they hadn't reached in time. And she thought about the look on Emma's face when the doors of the reception hall had opened, shock giving way to disbelief. Then to something she could only hope was forgiveness. When Emma returned in sweatpants and a hoodie, her hair damp from a quick rinse, she carried a blanket in her arms. She tossed it at Sarah. "You're on the couch. No arguing. You're not going anywhere tonight." Sarah caught it easily, smiling despite herself. "Yes, ma'am." They ended up in the living room, half watching some late-night rerun while the wind rattled softly at the windows. Emma eventually fell asleep, her head on Sarah's shoulder. The house was warm, the air heavy with the faint scent of vanilla from the wedding cake. For the first time in months, Sarah's mind wasn't on the next mission or the last one. It was here, in this quiet, imperfect moment. And she realized that maybe, just maybe, not all battles had to be fought in uniform. The morning light slid across the living room like a quiet hand, touching the edge of the couch where Sarah lay. She woke to the smell of coffee brewing and the muffled sound of movement in the kitchen. For a second, she didn't know where she was. Her body was trained to wake in tents, barracks, and safe houses, always alert. But here, in the soft hum of a family home, she felt safe. Emma appeared in the doorway holding 2 mugs. Her hair was pulled back, face still soft with sleep. "Morning," she said, almost cautiously, as though afraid the wrong tone might shatter the fragile peace they'd built last night. "Morning," Sarah replied, sitting up and taking the mug. It was hot and strong, just the way she liked it. The first sip was enough to pull her fully into the day. They ate breakfast at the kitchen table. Eggs, toast, and fruit. Nothing special, but the kind of meal Sarah hadn't shared with Emma in years. They didn't talk about the wedding, or the mission, or the years of missed moments. Instead, they made plans for the day. David's out with some friends from out of town. Emma said, "I thought maybe we could take a drive, go past the lake, you know? Like we used to." The drive was quiet at first. The radio played low, some nostalgic station that seemed stuck in the early 2000s. They passed the high school, the park where they'd once tried and failed to teach themselves how to skateboard, the little diner where Sarah had told Emma she was enlisting. At the lake, the air was sharp with the scent of pine and cold water. The surface shimmered under a pale winter sun, and for a moment, Sarah felt like she was 17 again, home on a summer afternoon before life got complicated. They walked along the shoreline, the sound of gravel underfoot mixing with the occasional bird call. "You know," Emma said after a while, "when you called to say you couldn't come, I thought I wouldn't be able to look at you again. I was so angry, Sarah. I still am." "A little," Sarah stopped, facing her. "I know, and I don't expect that to just go away because I showed up at the last minute." Emma nodded, looking out over the water. "But then I thought about how you've been there for other people, strangers, in ways most of us can't even imagine. And I realized maybe I just wanted you to choose me once, to prove I still mattered in that part of your life." Sarah's throat tightened. "You do matter, more than anyone. That's why I fought so hard to get here, because I needed you to know that." They stood there for a moment, letting the breeze fill the space between them. Then Emma smiled faintly and started walking again, and Sarah fell into step beside her. The next few days passed in a rhythm Sarah had almost forgotten. They cooked dinner together, bickered about who got the last slice of pie, Stayed up late watching old movies they knew by heart. They even went into town, where Sarah couldn't. Walk more than a block without someone stopping her to shake her hand or thank her for her service. Emma noticed the way her sister handled each exchange. Polite, appreciative, but always with a careful distance, as if never quite letting people pass the surface. One night, they sat in the backyard under a blanket of stars. The air was cold, their breath fogging in front of them. Emma traced constellations with her finger while Sarah leaned back in her chair, just listening. "You ever think about what's next?" Emma asked suddenly. Sarah considered it. "In the military, you don't plan too far ahead. You think about the next mission, maybe the one after that. Anything else feels risky, like you'll jinx it." Emma tilted her head, studying her sister's face in the dim light. "That's no way to live, Sarah." "Maybe not, but it's the way I've learned to survive." They didn't speak for a while after that. Somewhere, a dog barked. A car passed on a distant road. The night felt heavy, not in a bad way, but in the way that comes when you know something won't last forever, and it wouldn't. By the fourth day, the first signs came. Calls from Hayes, logistics updates. Quiet reminders that the world outside Millbrook hadn't stopped turning. A part of Sarah wanted to ignore it, to let the messages pile up and vanish into the static. But the part of her that had kept her alive in every hostile zone she'd ever been in knew better. On the evening of the fifth day, she stood in the kitchen staring at her phone. The message was short. "Transport at 0500. Be ready." Emma came in from the backyard, cheeks flushed from the cold. "Everything okay?" Sarah hesitated. She wanted to lie just for a few more hours of peace, but she couldn't. "I have to leave in the morning." The words didn't surprise Emma. Not really, but they still hurt. She leaned against the counter, arms folded, her gaze fixed on the floor. "Guess I should have known it was coming." Sarah stepped closer. "It doesn't make it any easier for me either." Emma's voice was quiet, but steady. "Then make me a promise. Not that you'll always be here. I'm not naive, just promise you'll come back, even if it's for a few days, even if it's not for a wedding." Sarah held her eyes. "I promise." They stayed there for a long time, neither moving, both knowing that the next morning would come too quickly. The alarm went off at 0400. Sarah silenced it instantly, sitting up on the couch in the dark. The blanket Emma had tossed at her the first night still covered her legs, warm with the faint scent of detergent and home. For a few seconds, she stayed still, listening to the quiet house. The only light came from under the kitchen door, spilling faint gold into the hallway. She found Emma there, already dressed in a hoodie and leggings, hands wrapped around a steaming mug, the smell of coffee wrapped around them like a soft grip. "You're up early," Sarah said. "I wasn't going to let you leave without saying goodbye," Emma replied. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her, a shine that caught in the dim light. They sat at the table, both holding mugs they barely drank from. The minutes ticked by, each one pulling them closer to the inevitable. Sarah had said goodbye to plenty of people in her life, friends, fellow soldiers, strangers she'd rescued and might never see again. But this was different. This wasn't a clean break. It was a goodbye with strings, threads that would tug every time she thought about home. The headlights of a Humvee cut across the kitchen window. The convoy had arrived. Neither moved at first. Then Emma stood, walking around the table. Sarah rose to meet her, and they held each other without speaking. It was a hug that said all the things words couldn't. "I'll miss you. I'm proud of you. Come back." When they pulled apart, Emma tried to smile. "Don't make me regret forgiving you." Sarah almost laughed. "I wouldn't dare." At the door, Sarah paused, looking back at the kitchen, the hallway, the house that was both familiar and strange after so many years away. She wanted to fix every detail in her mind. The creak in the third floorboard, the smell of coffee in the morning, the way her sister's voice sounded here, softer than anywhere else. Outside, the air was cold enough to bite. Rodriguez was at the wheel again, engine idling, watching her through the windshield. The rest of the unit was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes from understanding exactly what moments like this cost. Emma stood on the porch, hands in the pockets of her hoodie, watching as Sarah climbed into the Humvee. They didn't wave. It felt too final. Instead, they just held each other's gaze until the convoy began to roll forward, the gap between them widening. Sarah turned in her seat, watching the house until it disappeared behind the curve of the road. The town faded next. The diner, the water tower, the landmarks that had stitched her childhood together. And then there was nothing but the long stretch of road ahead, the familiar weight of the mission settling over her again. But something was different this time. In her mind, she still saw Emma on the dance floor, the way her bouquet had fallen, the way she had run toward her without hesitation. She felt the echo of late-night coffee at the kitchen table, of lemon cake shared at 3 a.m., of promises made in the quiet. The mission would come, as it always did. There would be danger, exhaustion, impossible choices. But now there was also this, the knowledge that she had managed just once to choose both. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It doesn't argue or explain or beg to be understood. Sometimes it just acts. And when it does, it changes everything.